Somewhere outside the fortress, a group of barbarian girls sat on white wolves, armed with arrows and bows in their hands. Their leader prepared an arrow and shot it toward the guards standing on the fortress walls. Caught off guard, the guards were unable to react in time, and the arrow caused a devastating explosion in their vicinity. The barbarian girl then ordered her companions to begin attacking. The barbarian, along with her wolves, engaged in a fierce battle against the soldiers of the Morg clan. The wolves attacked with ferocity while the barbarians slashed at their enemies. They used ropes to tie the soldiers' necks, incapacitating them. Just as the chaotic scene unfolded, Vicar arrived and witnessed the gruesome sight. He wondered if he had arrived too quickly, observing the intense fight between the Morg soldiers and the barbarians. Suddenly, a rope flew toward him and wrapped tightly around his neck. Vicar looked ahead with a questioning gaze and realized that two barbarian girls had skillfully used ropes to secure it around his neck. They spoke in their native language, mentioning something about catching a good one and the hunt for husbands going well. Vicar realized their intention and thought to himself about the barbarians hunting for husbands. He deduced that they were capturing people to become suitors, aiming to breed a superior race for their tribe. Swiftly, Vicar caught hold of the rope and swung it, causing the girls who held the leash to be flung into the air. Vicar simply said that he couldn't be their husband and that he might already be engaged. As the two barbarian girls slammed into the ground, the male barbarians watched in shock. They began preparing for an arrow attack, uncertain of Vicar's affiliation. One of them questioned his companion if Vicar was part of the enemy forces. Undeterred by the situation, Vicar didn't back down. He boldly moved forward, heading straight toward the incoming arrows. In his mind, he recalled Hugo's eager request for him to avoid initiating a battle before joining up with the main force. He contemplated whether he should wait for the main force to arrive. With determination, Vicar drew his sword and swiftly cut down the incoming arrows with precise strikes, showcasing his skill and agility. The barbarians were shocked by Vicar's display of skill and expressed their disbelief. However, their surprise was short-lived as a sudden fire attack engulfed them, causing them to cry out in pain. Camus, who had used the fire spell, appeared behind Vicar and expressed her anger towards the barbarians, declaring their demise. Vicar observed Camus with surprise as he realized that she had turned the entire area into a sea of fire. Camus questioned Vicar, asking if he had used liquid aura, implying that she recognized his abilities as a graduator. She stated that she knew he was the only man she could acknowledge. Vicar confirmed that he had received an order from the Patriarch to avoid battles until regrouping with the main force. Undeterred, Camus began casting multiple spells and questioned if it was an order from Baskerville's Patriarch. She then asserted that a Baskerville should refrain from intervening, as she intended to eliminate all the barbarians. Camus unleashed a series of powerful attacks, burning a vast area in front of them. Vicar looked in shock and recognized the spell as burn. He also noticed that she was employing a quadra casting technique for burning spells, and he observed an increase in the lethality of her attacks. Camus, driven by the desire to avenge her younger cousin, continued to cast spells, determined to carry out her revenge. Suddenly, a barbarian used a dart blower and blew a needle that landed on Camus' neck. She felt the sting and realized she had been poisoned. Camus noticed a barbarian sitting on a wolf's back who had attacked her. She fell to the ground, unable to move due to the numbing poison. Vicar observed her condition and thought to himself that she was quite a handful. The barbarian then threw a rope toward Camus, but Vicar swiftly caught it before it could reach her. Camus acknowledged his catch and complimented him. Vicar looked at her and suggested that it would be better for them to retreat. Camus questioned what would happen to the farmlands and the captives. Vicar replied that it would be wiser to avoid engaging in battles until the main force from Baskerville arrived. Camus, determined to avenge her cousin who had been taken away by the barbarians, refused to retreat. Vicar looked at her and urged her to make a rational decision. However, in the next moment, Vicar sensed an arrow attack approaching from behind his head. With quick reflexes, he managed to dodge the arrow just in time. Vicar observed the barbarian girl who had launched the arrow and wondered if this was the destructive power Camus had mentioned earlier. However, while lost in his thoughts, a barbarian arrived behind him and swiftly took Camus away. In desperation, Camus called out Vicar's name, desperately seeking his help. Vicar watched the scene unfold in frustration and contemplated the situation. He recalled a time in the past when Camus Morg, still an adolescent, was held captive but returned after annihilating the barbarians. Despite her reputation as the Queen of La Rouge et La Noire, Vicar realized that he needed to do what was necessary. Suddenly, the barbarian girl lunged at Vicar, launching an attack. With remarkable agility, he swiftly evaded her strike, his senses sharpened. To his astonishment, he discovered that she had used a bow to attack him. The barbarian girl immediately followed up with a kick that sent Vikir sliding back. Vikir assessed the situation and thought that her movements were different from the other barbarians. He wondered if he needed to go all out against her. The barbarian girl looked at Vikir with a smirk and said, "We meet again." Vikir's memory flashed back to the slave auction where he had liberated her from her cage. He hesitated for a moment, then asked her if she intended to repay his act of kindness with revenge. The barbarian girl clarified that her vengeance was directed towards the Morg clan, as they had captured her and enslaved her. She emphasized that Morg clan had no direct connection to Vikir. She mounted her wolf and declared that she would repay what she had received. She declared her intention to exact revenge and take Camus, the next leader of the Morg clan, as payment for what she had endured. If Vikir desired to rescue his girl, he was to follow them. Vikir considered whether he needed to reveal his power in this situation. Just then, Camus' uncle, Adolf, arrived and called out to Camus. Vikir looked at Adolf Morg and wondered if he had come after learning about the ambush. Adolf immediately began casting a spell and called the barbarians bastard. Adolf launched the spell, causing the ground to break, and demanded the barbarians to return his niece. But the barbarians swiftly maneuvered over the surface with the aid of their wolves. They deftly leaped between the shattered rocks and managed to escape. Adolf witnessed this with frustration and uttered his displeasure. Vikir thought about Balak and how the ambush had concluded merely 3 minutes after the warning bell had rung. The situation had escalated due to Camus' carelessness and lack of practical experience overlapping with it. Vikir then noticed a mage who informed Adolf that they believed the barbarians had fled to the restricted area of Le Rouge et Le Noir mountain. Adolf exclaimed angrily upon hearing the news, fully aware of the perils associated with the restricted area. He understood that the restricted area was an uncharted and hazardous place. His mind was concerned about the idea of venturing there at night, knowing well the risks it posed. Despite his niece being captured, Adolf found himself questioning if there was any action he could take in this predicament. Just then, Vikir spoke up, stating that they could still pursue the barbarians. Adolf was taken aback and questioned Vikir's suggestion, as entering the forest at night was considered dangerous. However, before Adolf could inquire further, Vikir interrupted him and confidently stated that he had extensive experience navigating the dense forest since his childhood. Vikir reflected on his past, realizing that before his regression, he had gained valuable knowledge and skills through reconnaissance and subjugation experiences in various dense forests. Adolf grabbed Vikir by the shoulders, eager to confirm his seriousness. He asked if Vikir was truly committed to the task at hand. The mage from the Morg clan advised Adolf, referring to him as the Grand Senator, that venturing to Le Rouge et Le Noir mountain would be a suicide mission. However, Adolf disregarded the warning, asserting that those who didn't want to go were free to abstain from the mission and he wouldn't hold it against them later. Adolf looked at Vikir and acknowledged that he already knew the extraordinary nature of this young individual. Reluctantly, he realized that he had no other choice but to rely on Vikir's abilities. Addressing Vikir directly, Adolf entrusted him with the responsibility of saving his niece. The dense forest of the Le Rouge et Le Noir mountain within the Baskerville territory was described as a treacherous habitat filled with bone-sucking mosquitoes, poisonous thorny vines, silent spiders, and other dangerous creatures. It was known as the life-engulfing forest because a normal person wouldn't be able to survive there for more than an hour. However, Morg and Baskerville's troops closely followed Vikir through the dangerous forest. Vikir swiftly ran through the forest, impressing Adolf. Unable to contain his curiosity, Adolf asked if all boys from the Baskerville clan were like Vikir. Staffordshire Baskerville stated that not all individuals were like that. However, he acknowledged that young Master Vikir was an exception. As Vikir came across 2 poisonous bees obstructing their path, he effortlessly eliminated them with his remarkable skills. The Baskerville triplets observed Vikir's impressive demonstration of expertise and couldn't help but feel a sense of awe, finding him truly cool. Suddenly, Vikir stopped behind a tree and instructed the group to halt. He noticed some light ahead and informed the group that he believed the barbarians hadn't fled too far. Vikir then shared a rumor he had heard about the Balak hunters scattering dry leaves to listen for the sounds of their pursuers. He emphasized the need for extra caution from that point forward. Unexpectedly, Adolf approached Vikir and cast a spell called Silence on him. Vikir looked at him with a questioning expression, and Adolf quickly explained that the magic would prevent Vikir from making any noise as he walked. Adolf smiled and declared that he would take over from that point onward, expressing his gratitude for Vikir's assistance. He referred to Vikir as his nephew-in-law, leaving Vikir puzzled as he wondered about the meaning behind this familial term. Not far from their location, the barbarians had set up their camp in the forest, with a fire burning in the middle. Camus, who was tied to a tree trunk with ropes, shouted at the barbarians, threatening to burn them all to death once she escaped. She boasted about her special fireball and warned them to prepare themselves. However, the barbarians paid no attention to her, most likely because they couldn't understand her language. The barbarian girls standing before Camus engaged in conversation. One of them expressed her liking for the guy they had encountered earlier, while her companion mentioned her failure in husband hunting. Camus observed their interaction and thought to herself, frustrated that they weren't even listening to her. She concluded that they had been discussing husband hunting and wife hunting since earlier. She wondered if this was the reason they had been ambushing their group. Just then, the barbarian male who had captured her approached Camus. He spoke to her in the barbarian language with a smirk, suggesting that since they had captured such an excellent female, all the males within their tribe would desire her. Camus shouted back, calling him a perverted bastard and questioning his intentions. She pleaded for him to kill her instead. The barbarian scratched his ear and remarked that he didn't understand what she was saying. He caught her face by her chin and he claimed that he could tell she was talking back just by looking into her eyes. With an evil expression, he licked the arrowhead in his hand, suggesting that he believed this arrogant slave needed to be disciplined. Just as the argument was about to escalate, the barbarian girl, who had been saved by Vikir from the slave auction, arrived at the scene. She referred to the barbarian male as Ahun and firmly told him to stay away from her slave. Ahun was taken aback and called out to her as Commander Ayan, proudly stating that he was the one who had captured her. But Ayan called his words bullshit and told him to keep his voice down. Ahun tried to defend himself, questioning her defiance and insisting that he had shot a paralyzing arrow and set a trap to capture their target. In response, she pointed out that it was thanks to her intervention that Ahun's life had been saved, as she had stopped the boy who was good with the sword. If it weren't for her intervention, he would have been dead by now. Ahun questioned whether Camus had become the commander's booty, to which Ayan confirmed. Camus observed their argument and pondered if an internal dispute had arisen among the barbarians. With her limited understanding of the barbarian language, she deciphered the girl's name as Ayan and deduced her role as the commander. Ahun then stated the fact that Ayan was a female commander. Ayan retorted, asking him what difference it made. Camus realized that Ayan possessed the skill to go up against Vikir, who was a low-ranking graduator. If she wanted to escape, she knew she had to deal with Ayan somehow. Ahun pointed his finger at Ayan and declared that he wouldn't tolerate her stubbornness just because she was a commander. Ayan became angry, and a blue aura surrounded her. With a fierce look in her eyes, she warned Ahun that if he was pissed, he could come at her anytime, and she would turn him into a bloody mess. Fear struck Ahun, and his entire body was covered in a cold sweat. He raised his hands in surrender, acknowledging defeat. He conceded that he was not angry and told Ayan to do as she pleased. After Ahun left the scene, Camus looked at Ayan and thought that it seemed like the girl had won their dispute. Ayan then turned her attention to Camus and praised her for her good eyes and physique. She acknowledged that such qualities were expected of her as the future leader of the Morg bloodline. However, Ayan kicked Camus and revealed that she had been captured by the Morg bastards and sold into slavery. She was lucky enough and had managed to escape that fate with some kindness, but she warned Camus that she wouldn't be as lucky. Ayan vowed to tame Camus to the point where she would feel it in her bones and soul. She ominously mentioned that performing menial tasks, such as licking the space between her toes, would become a daily routine for Camus. Just then, a loud scream came from behind Ayan, and as she turned back, she saw a large fire. She questioned if it was an explosion. One of the barbarians was engulfed in flames and screaming in pain. Meanwhile, the other barbarians prepared their weapons and shouted that it was an ambush. A figure emerged before the fire and condemned the barbarians, vowing to repay them for what they had done. Camus's face lit up with a smile as she recognized the voice and shouted, "Uncle." Adolf Morg, who was responsible for the massive explosion, stood there with flames still burning in his hands, and in a stern voice, he demanded the immediate return of his niece. The barbarians were taken aback as the Baskerville and Morg clan members began hunting them down. Vikir, perched on a tree branch, observed the scene and found it strange. He couldn't understand why the Balak hunters, who had ambushed them systematically, were in such disarray. The barbarian girls rode their wolves and expressed their frustration at the chaotic uproar caused by the Baskerville and Morg clan members within the forest in the middle of the night. Adolf witnessed the barbarians attempting to flee, and he vehemently declared that they should not be allowed to escape. He insisted on eliminating every single one of them. Camus, who was tied to a tree, smiled at the chaotic scene, feeling satisfied and thinking that the barbarians deserved it. Just then, Camus heard some sounds coming from behind and became shocked. She turned around and saw Vikir. He placed his finger on his mouth, signaling her to be silent, but she couldn't contain her excitement and shouted his name. Vikir quickly cut the ropes that had tied Camus to the tree and offered his support to help her up. Camus was filled with happiness and asked him if he had come to save her. Vikir was slightly annoyed and questioned her lack of understanding of the gesture of silence. As they began to walk away, Ayan suddenly appeared before them. She recognized Vikir's exceptional knife-wielding skills and expressed her anticipation of his arrival. Ayan praised Vikir's strong physique, which allowed him to cover long distances in a short period, his level-headedness that guided him through the darkness of the forest, and his passionate and pure love that made him risk his life for Camus. With a smile, Ayan conveyed that she wouldn't inquire about Vikir's past and mentioned that he had passed. Vikir was left perplexed by Ayan's statement, questioning what exactly he had passed. Camus and Ayan locked eyes and engaged in a silent battle, conveying their intent through their intense gaze. Vikir tightened his grip around Camus and realized that it might be difficult to conceal his own abilities in this situation. He couldn't help but wonder why he couldn't recall anyone like her from his previous life. Vikir questioned himself whether Ayan was the one who scarred Hugo's nose bridge, the Balak archer known as the Night Fox. However, he concluded that she was still too young and inexperienced to be that person. He also considered the possibility of her belonging to the same bloodline as the Night Fox. Suddenly, a barbarian launched a surprise attack on Vikir with a dart, but Vikir managed to block the attack with his hand, causing the dart to break upon contact. It was the same barbarian who had kidnapped Camus, and he was shocked by how Vikir knew about the attack. Vikir then took Camus in his arms and informed her that things had become troublesome, and that he would take her to her uncle. Blushing, Camus agreed to accompany him. She was surprised by his use of formal language and concluded that it might be due to the effects of the poison. Moving swiftly from their current location, Vikir headed toward Adolf. Ayan looked disappointed and expressed her desire for Vikir to return obediently with her. Meanwhile, as Vikir carried Camus, he asked her if she was severely poisoned. Camus replied uncertainly, stating that she believed she might be. As they made their way, two barbarians fired arrows at Vikir, but he skillfully blocked both attacks, ensuring their safety. Ayan, on the other hand, prepared her bow and arrow, taking aim at Camus. With a cold tone, she questioned whether she should eliminate the girl from Morgue. Without hesitation, she released the arrow, which left a bluish aura trail as it traveled toward them. As the arrow approached them, Vikir looked back with his eyes glowing red and noticed the arrow aimed at Camus. Surprised by Vikir's sudden reaction, Camus turned her gaze backward and saw the arrow, which was dangerously close to hitting her eye. However, just as the arrow was about 2 inches away from Camus's eye, it froze in place, halted by a wall of ice cast by Adolf. The protective ice wall prevented the arrow from reaching Camus. Adolf expressed his worry, exclaiming about his niece's well-being, and Camus, relieved, called out to her uncle. Adolf took hold of Camus and cast a spell called Cure Poison on her. He explained that it was a severe numbing poison, making it challenging to completely remove. He suggested visiting the Divine Quo Vadis when they returned to seek further treatment. However, Camus pushed Adolf's hand away, requesting him to let go for a moment. Confused by her sudden request, Adolf complied. Camus then ran toward Vikir, jumping onto him and embracing him tightly. She expressed her gratitude, thanking Vikir for saving her once again. Adolf was taken aback by this unexpected scene, and in disbelief, he shouted Camus's name. He looked at Camus with teary eyes and attempted to explain that he had also done his best. However, Camus, with an angry expression, questioned why her uncle had only arrived at that moment. She declared her intention to tell everything to her mother, expressing her dissatisfaction. Just as they were moving forward, a rope suddenly flew towards Vikir and wrapped around his neck. It was Ayan who had thrown the rope, attempting to pull Vikir towards her. However, despite her efforts, Vikir remained steadfast and didn't budge. Ayan couldn't understand why Vikir was so strong, not yielding even an inch. Ayan expressed to Vikir that it would be best if he obediently allowed himself to be captured, as she claimed she didn't have much time. Camus, witnessing this exchange, recognized Ayan and exclaimed her disbelief at encountering her once again. Vikir broke the rope around his neck and pondered Ayan's words about there being no time. He wondered if there was a specific reason for the Balak to be in such a hurry. Suddenly, a wave of killing intent engulfed the entire forest. Birds took flight in a panic, and a sense of dread permeated the area. Ian looked up in horror and exclaimed, realizing that whatever she had anticipated had finally noticed their presence. Beelzebub on Vickers' hand began to buzz, and he looked down to find his hand stained with red lines. He realized that the hidden Beelzebub within his arteries was giving him an intense warning, indicating that something was approaching. Ian uttered the words, "She's coming." Vicker looked at her with a questioning gaze and wondered who or what Ian was referring to with the word she. With a cold sweat covering her face, Ian uttered the words, "Madam Eight Legs." Suddenly, a massive pillar-like structure emerged from the heart of the forest. The barbarians recognized it immediately and exclaimed, "It's the Madam. The Madam is here." Camus gazed at the towering pillar, questioning whether it was truly just a pillar. Meanwhile, Vicker looked up and denied the possibility, saying, "No way." The pillar, shrouded in a purple aura, suddenly burst open, revealing 8 elongated appendages resembling branches. These legs descended rapidly and firmly rooted themselves in the ground. Adolf, overcome with concern, voiced his disbelief, finding it impossible for such a monstrous creature to be concealed within this forest. Vicker's face grew anxious as he had never thought he would encounter this monster in a place like this. He realized that the creature he was facing was none other than Madam Eight Legs, a notorious entity with an S risk rating. The gigantic spider stood tall on its 8 legs and emitted a piercing scream that resonated throughout the entire forest, instilling fear in everyone present.